And joining us now on the line is Dana Perino, a former White House press secretary, and you see her as the co-host of Fox News Channel's The Five. That's a great show, and boy, a highly rated show as well. And of course, you got a new book out called The Good News Is. Good morning to you, Dana.
Hi, Brian. It's interesting to talk to you from this end of the line.
Yeah, well, it is. It's good to have you on with us this morning. Congratulations, the book is doing well. Tell us a little bit about what The Good News is all about.
You know, it's I call it Little House on the Prairie meets the West Wing.
Yeah.
It's about how it answers the question I get a lot: how does somebody like you, that grew up in eastern Wyoming with no political connections, end up as the White House press secretary, the first Republican woman to do so? And I provide some advice along the way. The good news being two things. That one, God has had a better plan for me. Every time I make a plan, and I'm a planner, He has had a better idea in mind, and I've been in position to be able to take advantage of that. And the other thing is, that's a phrase that I used to use all the time in my career, especially when I worked at the White House. The press secretary isn't always, you don't always want to see her coming, okay? If she's coming, she probably has bad news. So I would always end every meeting I had with a little bit of good news somehow.
Yeah. You do have a very sunny personality, which we see on Fox News in this new role that you have now. But you occasionally had to deal with a very difficult press corps. And I read that in the book you reveal that you had a way of dealing with the frustrations that you faced from time to time with the line of questioning with, well, let's say behind the podium where nobody could see, there was, is it true, an occasional one-finger salute to people when they ask you a question you didn't like?
Well, it was very rarely used. It wasn't questions I didn't like. It was reserved mainly just for a couple of people I knew that would show off for the cameras and peacock around. And I used that verb for a reason.
Very good.
Well, I was going to ask you if I ever, because occasionally I think I was in that briefing room when you were press secretary, and I want to make sure that I didn't receive any of those salutes.
Never.
No, he wasn't peacocking around. He was sly as a fox, wasn't
That's
he,
right.
Dana Perino?
Exactly.
Dana, you did approach your job in the Bush administration with a sunny personality. I think, and you were, let's face it, the latter years of the Bush administration, it was tough for the press secretary. It was tough for the press spokesman. It was tough for a lot of us who supported the president and his policies and continue to do so. I wonder if, as a partisan, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, and I wanted in those years the Bush administration to fight back harder, to tell their story in a much firmer way. And you look at how Jay Carney and Josh Earnest conduct themselves, and they're combative. They go after the press. I think that oftentimes they're quite rude. Was that a conscious decision on your part? Was it an administration policy, or is it just, it's your personality? You didn't want to get into it with the media in such a harsh way that your successors did.
That's a great question. I actually talk a little bit about it in the book because there were times when I thought maybe I should, bare some teeth and punch somebody or really get angry.
Yes.
But here's the thing: is that number one, I think that people can spot someone who is inauthentic from a mile away, and I think that makes them less effective. Also, I had a standard that I had to meet, and that was the one that George W. Bush required of all of us: was to conduct ourselves with dignity and honor, and to recognize that the press had a job to do. So when I was at the podium, I would imagine if President Bush were watching me right now, would he be proud of what I was saying? And if the answer was no, then I didn't say it. But that also worked for me because I had to just be myself. And my nature is to try to persuade using fact. So that's why I studied all the time. I tried to be the most over-prepared person in the room. I wanted everybody to know that I had all the answers. And that put me in a position of power. I also just think that in the long run, looking back, I think that my demeanor with grace and dignity actually represented him best at that time. And one of the things I write in the book is that, of course, all the people that read it are not going to become the White House press secretary. But I do think that kind of approach to communication at work does lead to better personal success and also career achievement.
You know, you replaced Tony Snow, who was going through some difficult medical stuff and eventually did pass away, and you had to sort of stand up very quickly without a lot of warning to take that job. Did you feel at the time that you were ready? I mean, I can imagine, you know, you're in the press operation and you know how it works, but all of a sudden you're thrust into the big chair.
Well, I never thought that I could actually replace Tony Snow. And there's a scene in the book where I describe how on his last day of work at the White House, he came to see me at my office and he said, "How are things going?" And I said, "Well, not very well, because I don't know how I'm supposed to replace you. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this." And he made me stand up and he held onto my shoulders and looked me in the eye and said, "You are better at this than you think you are." And about 2 weeks later, after I'd done the briefings and hadn't started any new world wars or anything like that, I realized what he meant, that I didn't have to be like him, that I could just be myself.
Yeah.
So he gave me a real gift of confidence. And the other reason that I felt pretty prepared to walk into that role was because Tony Snow had absolutely no ego. You know, a lot of people in Washington, when they get to that principal level, if they're around the president,
right,
then they don't like to let anybody else get near the president because for some reason they think that will diminish their role. And Tony Snow is the opposite. He would always send me to be with the president on the trips and to brief him before press conferences. So I actually was in a pretty good position to take over.
I wonder, Dana, you know, you worked for the White House, and now you're a commentator on Fox News. But it's very clear that you're a commentator. But you see other people, you know, you got Chuck Todd used to work on Capitol Hill, I believe, as a staffer. You got George Stephanopoulos, of course. We know he worked in the White House. Jake Tapper, I believe, was also an employee of a Capitol Hill staffer. All of these guys, right? And they all work, so they all work in politics, and then they move over into journalism, but they're represented as anchors, as reporters, as these nonpartisan types. Are you concerned about that trend? Yeah. What do you think?
Well, here's the thing. I think I just have to accept it. I don't think that they would accept me in that role.
Exactly.
Even though I actually probably am more fair than most people.
Yeah.
And I think that, I remember it was actually, I think it was Michael Barone, I think. Well, I was in the green room at Fox. This is right after I left the White House, and I was complaining about media bias of some sort that day. And I said something wasn't fair. And he said, "Dana, you're going to have to give up on fairness."
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of good advice. It didn't mean that I didn't have to be fair, but it meant that I could just accept the situation. And that's what I advise to all of the Republican candidates. You know, just accept it and factor it into your thinking. That means you have to work harder and try harder and be more persuasive. Okay, fine. Well, then accept that and do it.
Just know that that's the deal. Yeah, the Democrats just announced 6 primary debates. I would love to see Dana Perino be one of the people asking the questions of the candidates, but it'll never happen.
I think it's only going to be asking the questions of Hillary Clinton. It's going to be a pretty boring debate.
All right. Listen, Dana, the name of the book is And the Good News Is. Congratulations, and thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
You guys started my day off just right.
Thank you.
Well, don't be a stranger.
Tell Gutfeld we said hi, too.
Okay.
All right, thanks.